The Dallas Mavericks select Samaki Walker from the University of Louisville.
Samaki Walker, born February 25th, 1976. Today's feature was supposed to be part of the future, a 6'9" forward taken 9th overall in the 1996 NBA draft. He entered the league with expectations tied to a long-term production and real impact, but that's not how things played out, because while Samaki lasted a decade in the NBA, played alongside stars, and even won a championship with the Los Angeles Lakers, the reality is his career never matched the weight of that draft position. He never averaged double figures in a single season, never developed into a reliable scoring option, and never became a player a franchise could build around. Instead, he settled into a role, valuable at times, replaceable at others, and in most cases that would be enough. But context matters, because the 1996 draft wasn't just any draft. It produced multiple Hall of Famers and All-Stars taken after him, which only magnifies how his career is viewed today. So when you look back, it's not about whether he belonged in the league. The real question is why a top 10 pick never came close to playing like one. What happened? Let's talk about it. Salute to Deboff 858 on YouTube for this request. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth. Let's get it. Like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know who I should do next. Samaki Walker, a 6'9" forward from Columbus, Ohio, came into the spotlight as one of the more intriguing young big men in the country. He earned a scholarship to the University of Louisville, where his physical tools and potential stood out. He showed flashes of being a modern forward for that era, mobile, active on the boards, and capable of scoring inside, but he was still raw. Despite that, his upside was enough to generate real draft buzz, especially in a league that valued size and potential in young frontcourt players. After just 2 college seasons, Walker declared for the 1996 NBA draft, betting on that potential rather than a fully polished game. He was selected 9th overall by the Dallas Mavericks, a franchise looking to add young talent during a rebuilding phase. At the time, the pick made sense on paper. Walker had the frame, athleticism, and flashes that suggested he could grow into a productive starter. But even early on, there were questions about his offensive skill set and overall feel for the game. Out the gate, he struggled to carve out a consistent role, averaging modest numbers across 3 seasons while adjusting to the physicality and pace of the NBA. He showed effort and rebounding ability, but the offensive development never really came together. Eventually, he was traded, beginning a journeyman phase that would define much of his career. Still, his size and willingness to do the dirty work kept him in rotations, eventually landing him with the Los Angeles Lakers. There, he found his most stable role, starting games and contributing to a championship team in 2002, proof that he could help a winning team, even if he never became the player his draft position once suggested. Stunt number 1, drafted too high for what he was. From the moment Samaki Walker heard his name called 9th overall in the 1996 NBA draft, the expectations were already set. And the problem is, they were set way too high for the type of player he actually was. Because when you're taken in the top 10, especially in a draft like 96, you're not just expected to be solid, you're expected to become a difference maker, someone a franchise can point to as a part of its future. But Walker never entered the league as that kind of player. He entered as a projection. At Louisville, he showed flashes, size, mobility, rebounding instincts, but he was still raw. His offensive game wasn't polished, his scoring wasn't consistent, and he didn't dominate at the college level in a way that screamed top 10 lock. What he did have was potential, and in the mid-90s, potential for young big men was often overvalued. Teams were always searching for the next versatile forward they could develop, and Walker fit the physical mold. That's what Dallas bet on, not production, projection. The issue is, once you're picked that high, you don't get judged like a project, you get judged like a result. And almost immediately, that gap started to show. Walker wasn't a go-to option, wasn't creating offense, and wasn't impacting games in a way that justified his draft slot. He looked like what he really was, a rotation big still figuring things out, only with a top 10 label attached to him. And what made it worse wasn't just his own performance, it was who came after him. The 1996 draft is widely considered one of the deepest in NBA history, filled with all-stars, Hall of Famers, and long-term contributors taken after that 9th spot. So every time one of those players succeeded, it indirectly put more pressure on Walker's evaluation. Not because he was a bad player, but because he wasn't on that level. That's the part that defines this stunt. Samaki Walker didn't fail because he didn't belong in the NBA. He lasted 10 years for a reason. He rebounded, played his role, and contributed to winning teams. But he was never a top 10 caliber talent. And once that label is attached to you, it doesn't go away. It follows your entire career. So instead of being viewed as a solid role player who carved out a respectable run, Samaki Walker became something else. A player constantly measured against the draft position he was never truly built to live up to. Stunt number 2, no offensive growth to match that role. Once Samaki Walker got into the league, the next step was supposed to be development. That's what teams expect from a young big man taking that high. You come in raw, but over time you build something. A go-to move, a reliable scoring touch, some kind of offensive identity that makes you more than just a body on the floor. But that part of his game never really came together, and that's what kept him from ever breaking out of that role player tear. Early in Dallas, the opportunity was there. The team wasn't winning, the roster was still forming, and minutes were available. That's usually the environment where young players figure things out through repetition. But even with that runway, Walker never showed signs of becoming a consistent scoring option. He could finish around the rim, clean up misses, and run the floor, but when it came to creating offense or being relied on for points, it just wasn't there. No post game you could lean on, no mid-range jumper defenses had to respect, nothing that forced teams to game plan for him. And that matters more than it sounds, because for a forward in that era, especially one drafted in the top 10, you were expected to give teams something offensively. Even if you weren't a star, you had to at least threaten double digits regularly. Walker never got to reach that level. Not once in his career did he average at least 10 points per game, and that says everything about how limited his offensive role remained over time. As he moved from team to team, that identity followed him. Coaches didn't see him as someone to develop into more, they saw him as just someone to plug into a role. Rebound, defend, set screens, bring energy, and to his credit, he did those things well enough to stay in the league. But it also meant his ceiling was capped. There was no expansion to his game that forced teams to give him more responsibility. Even when he landed in better situations later in his career, his offensive role didn't grow, it shrank. Playing alongside elite scorers meant fewer touches and even less reason for coaches to try to expand on his game. By that point, he had already been defined. He wasn't a scorer, he wasn't a focal point, and he wasn't someone you ran plays for. He was just Samaki Walker. Stunt number 3, the league moved on from his archetype. By the early 2000s, the NBA was starting to shift, and that shift didn't exactly favor players like Samaki Walker. When he came into the league, there was still value in big forwards who could rebound, defend, and do the dirty work without needing the ball. But as the game evolved, teams began looking for more versatility out of that position, either more skill offensively or more impact defensively. And Walker, while solid in spots, didn't quite separate himself in either direction. At 6'9", he had good size for a power forward, but he didn't overwhelm you with his physicality. He could rebound, but he wasn't elite at it. He could defend, but he wasn't known as a stopper. And offensively, as already established, he wasn't someone you could rely on for production. So what you ended up with was a player who could do a little bit of everything, but not enough of anything to demand a bigger role as the league got more competitive. Even during his time with the Lakers, arguably the best situation of his career, his role reflected that reality. He started games, contributed minutes, and was part of a championship run in 2002, but even then, he wasn't a key piece in a way a top 10 pick is expected to be. He was more of a supporting part of a system built around stars, filling gaps rather than driving outcomes. And once players like that lose their spot in a stable system, the league moves quickly. Teams are always looking for younger, cheaper options who can provide similar production, and Walker became that kind of replaceable piece. After his time in Los Angeles, he bounced around multiple teams with shorter stints and less defined roles. The minutes became less consistent, the impact less noticeable, and the opportunities to re-establish himself as anything more than a role player started to disappear. That's really what this stunt comes down to. It wasn't one moment, one injury, or one bad decision that shifted his career. It was the reality that as the league evolved, he didn't evolve with it in a way that kept him valuable beyond a certain level. And in the NBA, once your role is defined and your ceiling is understood, it doesn't take long for teams to start looking elsewhere. So while Samaki Walker stayed in the league longer than most, his role never grew, cementing a career that never matched the expectations set from the beginning. All in all, Samaki Walker's story comes down to expectations versus reality. On one hand, he had a real NBA career, 10 seasons, meaningful minutes, and a championship with the Los Angeles Lakers. That alone puts him ahead of a lot of players who never stick. But on the other hand, being a 9th pick in the 1996 NBA draft comes with a different standard, and that's the part he never quite reached. He was never a double-digit scorer, never a focal point, and never developed into the kind of player teams build around. At the same time, his career wasn't empty. He found ways to stay in the league, accepted his role, and contributed where he could. That matters. Not every player can adjust to that reality, but when you look back at where he was drafted, especially in a class filled with stars and long-term impact players, it's hard not to see the gap between what was expected and what actually happened. In the end, Samaki Walker wasn't a failure. He just wasn't what a top 10 pick is supposed to be. Salute, much respect, but for these reasons, his growth was stunted. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth, and I'm out.